Some lies are born from fear. Others from desperation. But the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell to protect our hearts from the very thing they crave most. Naomi Winters had perfected the art of invisible existence. For 3 years, she'd walked the pristine marble floors of Ashford Gallery, cataloging masterpieces she'd never create, answering phones for artists whose talent she secretly believed she matched, and swallowing dreams that tasted like ash in her throat. At 28, she'd convinced herself that being a junior curator was enough, that proximity to greatness was its own reward. She almost believed it too, until the afternoon her carefully constructed world shattered across the gallery floor alongside her portfolio. It was supposed to be a quick trip. Slip into the gallery after hours, retrieve the insurance documents from her desk, slip out before anyone noticed. Simple. Clean. But Naomi had forgotten about Julian Blackwood's obsessive habit of working late. The gallery owner treated his space like a cathedral, often staying until midnight, walking through exhibitions with wine in hand, communing with the art in solitude. She'd admired this about him from a distance, the way some people admire dangerous animals in zoos, beautiful and untouchable behind thick glass. Julian wasn't conventionally handsome in the way magazine covers demanded, but he possessed something more arresting. Silver streaked through his dark hair like brushstrokes, and his gray eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much beauty and too much betrayal. He moved through the art world with the quiet authority of someone who'd built his empire painting by painting, relationship by relationship, instinct by instinct. At 41, he'd survived market crashes, forgery scandals, and bitter divorces. The art remained his only constant companion. Naomi had been halfway across the main gallery when her canvas portfolio bag, bulging with her secret paintings, caught on the corner of a pedestal. She'd grabbed for it instinctively, but the zipper had already surrendered. Canvases exploded across the floor like playing cards thrown by an angry god, each one revealing the truth she'd spent years hiding. Her paintings. Her soul, laid bare in oil and pigment. For a frozen moment, she could only stare at the destruction. 12 paintings scattered across polished marble, each one catching the soft gallery lighting in ways that made them seem to glow from within. Abstract landscapes that weren't quite abstract, portraits of emotions rather than faces, colors that shouldn't work together but somehow sang in harmony. 3 years of secret midnight work, exposed in a single clumsy moment. What's all this? Julian's voice came from behind her, smooth as aged whiskey and just as intoxicating. Naomi spun around, her heart attempting to escape through her throat. He stood in the archway leading to his private office, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, reading glasses perched on his head like a forgotten crown. His expression shifted from curiosity to something else as his gaze traveled across the paintings. Nothing, Naomi stammered, dropping to her knees and frantically gathering canvases. Just some things I was transporting. I'll clean this up immediately. But Julian was already moving closer, his footsteps deliberate and measured. He bent down gracefully, lifting one of her paintings before she could snatch it away. It was a study in blues and grays, an emotional landscape of loneliness that she'd painted after a particularly difficult day. His fingers handled it with the reverence usually reserved for discovered treasures. "These are extraordinary," he said quietly, his eyes tracing every brushstroke. "The technique is unusual, almost post-impressionist but with contemporary sensibilities. The emotional resonance is remarkable." He looked up at her, and Naomi felt pinned by that gray gaze. "Where did you get these?" Panic seized her vocal cords. This was it, the moment she'd always feared. If Julian knew she was the artist, everything would change. He'd see her differently, maybe encourage her, maybe pity her, maybe realize she'd been wasting her potential filing his paperwork. Or worse, he'd dismiss her work, and she'd have to face the possibility that her dreams were just illusions. The lie formed itself, spontaneous and complete, tumbling from her lips before rational thought could intervene. "They're my fiancé's work," she heard herself say. Thomas Bennett. "He's been painting abroad," studying classical techniques in Florence. I'm just storing these for him until he returns." The words felt like stones dropping into a well, each one creating ripples she couldn't control. Julian's expression shifted again, something flickering across his features too quickly to identify. Disappointment, perhaps? Or simple professional interest? "Your fiancé," he repeated, still holding her painting like it might dissolve. "I wasn't aware you were engaged." "It's relatively new," Naomi continued, "the lie growing roots and branches. We keep it private. Thomas is very focused on his work, almost reclusive about his art. He doesn't like attention." Julian stood, still cradling the canvas, his gaze moving between Naomi and the painting. "May I see the others?" She wanted to refuse, to gather her work and flee, but denying him would raise suspicions she couldn't afford. Slowly, reluctantly, she helped him arrange the paintings against the gallery wall, each one a piece of her heart displayed for dissection. Julian moved along the impromptu exhibition in silence, hands clasped behind his back, his face betraying nothing. Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears. She'd seen him evaluate art countless times, watched him make snap decisions that could elevate unknown artists to stardom or consign them to permanent obscurity. His opinion was gospel in their world. And now he was judging her work without knowing it was hers. "Your Thomas has remarkable talent," Julian finally said, turning to face her. "Raw, yes. Unrefined in places. But the emotional intelligence in these pieces is extraordinary. The way he captures isolation without making it feel hopeless, the way color becomes feeling rather than decoration." He paused, studying her face with unsettling intensity. "Has he exhibited before?" "No," Naomi whispered. "He's very private about his work. Honestly, he'd probably be angry that I brought these here." "Then he's a fool," Julian said bluntly. "Art this powerful deserves to be seen. It needs to be shared, experienced, felt by people beyond the artist's private space." He gestured at the paintings. "This is the kind of work that could anchor an entire exhibition. Fresh perspective, genuine emotion, technical skill combined with artistic courage." Naomi's chest constricted. This was everything she'd ever wanted to hear about her work, and it was being said to a phantom, a fictional man she'd conjured to protect herself from vulnerability. "I'll talk to him," she managed. "When he's back from Florence." "When exactly does Thomas return?" Julian's gray eyes held hers, and Naomi felt like he could see straight through to the truth cowering in her chest. 3 months, she invented wildly. "Maybe 4. His program is intensive." Julian nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested doubt, a crack in his acceptance of her story. He helped her carefully stack the paintings back into her portfolio, his fingers lingering on each one longer than necessary. "Naomi," he said as she prepared to flee with her exposed secrets, "I'd very much like to meet Thomas when he returns. I think Ashford Gallery could offer him opportunities that would benefit both his career and our collection." The gallery suddenly felt airless, the walls pressing closer. She'd painted herself into a corner with her lies, and now Julian wanted to meet the man who didn't exist, to offer opportunities to a ghost. "I'll mention it to him," Naomi said, backing toward the exit. "Thank you for your interest. One more thing." Julian's voice stopped her at the door. "You have excellent taste in men. Anyone who can create art like that must be someone quite extraordinary." Naomi fled before her face could betray what her mouth refused to confess, that the only extraordinary thing about Thomas was that he lived entirely in her imagination, a shield against the terrifying possibility that Julian Blackwood might look at her the way he looked at those paintings, with appreciation and hunger and undisguised want. The lie grew like ivy, beautiful and suffocating, wrapping around every interaction until Naomi could no longer see where truth ended and fiction began. Julian had become obsessed with Thomas Bennett's work. Over the following weeks, he mentioned the phantom artist in nearly every conversation, his enthusiasm building like a storm Naomi couldn't outrun. He wanted to plan an exhibition, to introduce this fresh voice to collectors who were desperate for authentic emotional resonance in an art world drowning in manufactured controversy. Each time he spoke about Thomas, Naomi felt the noose tighten around her own neck, woven from threads of her own desperate fabrication. She'd started painting more frantically, creating new pieces under the cover of darkness in her cramped apartment, channeling her growing panic and confusion into color and form. Every canvas became a confession she couldn't voice, emotions too dangerous to speak painted in shades that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. And every painting she completed, Julian wanted to see, to discuss, to analyze with the intensity of someone falling in love. "I need to meet him," Julian said one afternoon, cornering Naomi in the archive room where she'd been hiding between inventory lists and authentication certificates. The small space forced proximity she'd been carefully avoiding, his presence overwhelming in the confined area. "It's been 6 weeks, and you keep making excuses. Thomas needs to be part of these conversations if we're serious about an exhibition." Naomi's fingers trembled as she filed papers she'd already filed twice. "He's difficult about technology. The program in Florence is very isolated. They discourage modern distractions." "Then I'll fly to Florence," Julian countered, his persistence relentless. "I have contacts at the academia. I can arrange a visit without disrupting his studies." Panic clawed up Naomi's throat. "No. I mean, he'd hate that. Thomas is extremely private, almost pathologically so. Unexpected visits would send him deeper into isolation. Trust me, he needs to approach things on his own timeline." Julian leaned against the filing cabinet, blocking her escape route, his gray eyes searching her face with uncomfortable precision. "Naomi, is there something you're not telling me? Because your fiancé sounds less like an artist and more like a ghost." "He's real," she insisted, but the words lacked conviction even to her own ears. "He's just complicated. Artistic temperament, you know how it is." "I know how evasion sounds," Julian said quietly. "And I'm hearing a lot of it from you lately." The air between them felt charged, electric with unspoken truths. Naomi became hyper-aware of the space separating their bodies, barely 2 feet of air that felt simultaneously too much and not nearly enough. She could smell his cologne, something understated and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His shirt sleeves were rolled up again, exposing forearms that suggested he did more than sit behind desks making deals. When had she started noticing these details? When had Julian Blackwood transformed from her employer into something far more dangerous? "Why does it matter so much?" she whispered, unable to hold his gaze. "Why are you so invested in Thomas's work?" "Because it matters to you," Julian said, and the gentleness in his voice nearly broke her. "I see the way you handle those paintings, Naomi. Like they're pieces of your own heart. Any man who can inspire that kind of devotion must be remarkable, and any artist who can create work that moves you so deeply deserves recognition." Guilt crashed over her in waves. He thought her careful handling came from love for a fictional partner, when really it came from the simple fact that the paintings were hers, born from her own midnight desperation and desperate hope. "I should get back to work," she mumbled, attempting to slip past him. Julian's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm, sending electricity racing up her arm. "Wait. There's something else I need to say." She froze, trapped between his body and the filing cabinet, between truth and fiction, between safety and the terrifying unknown. "These past weeks, working with you on this project, getting to know Thomas's art through your eyes, it's been..." He paused, seeming to choose words carefully, significant. "You have a way of seeing beauty that most people miss. Your insights, your passion, the way you connect with art on a visceral level, it's extraordinary." Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory, conversations that strayed too close to confessions she couldn't afford. "Julian, I'm engaged," she reminded him, the lie tasting like poison on her tongue. "I know," he said, but didn't release her wrist. "And I respect that. But I also recognize something else. There's a connection between us, Naomi. Professional, yes, but also something more. Don't tell me you haven't felt it. She had felt it. Every day, every interaction, every moment his attention focused on her with that particular intensity he usually reserved for masterpieces. She'd felt it in the way her breath caught when he entered rooms, in the way her skin tingled when he stood too close, in the way she painted with increasing desperation because the feelings had to go somewhere and they couldn't go toward him. It doesn't matter what I feel, Naomi said, pulling her wrist free and immediately missing the warmth of his touch. I'm committed to Thomas. This conversation is inappropriate. Something flickered across Julian's face, hurt mixed with frustration. Is it? Or are you hiding behind Thomas because you're afraid of something real? The accusation struck too close to truth. Naomi pushed past him, needing distance, needing air, needing to escape before she crumbled entirely. I'll bring more of Thomas's work next week, she said over her shoulder. For the exhibition planning. But that's all this can be, Julian. Professional. Nothing more. She didn't see his expression as she fled, didn't witness the way his hand clenched at his side or the way his jaw tightened with restrained emotion. She was too busy running from the truth that chased her down gallery corridors and into restless nights. That evening, Naomi painted until her hands cramped and her eyes burned. The canvas that emerged was chaotic, violent even, slashes of crimson and black depicting the internal war between desire and fear. She titled it Coward's Heart and knew she could never show it to Julian, because he'd recognize himself in the yearning brushstrokes and see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Simone, the only person who knew the truth about Thomas's non-existence. Lunch tomorrow. You sound like you're drowning. Throw me a line so I can pull you out. Naomi smiled despite the tears threatening to spill. Simone worked in fashion design, moved through life with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to take up space, and had spent years trying to convince Naomi to claim her own power. The lecture tomorrow would be fierce and loving and probably exactly what Naomi needed to hear, even if she wouldn't follow the advice. The next week brought fresh torture. Julian announced he'd secured interest from 3 major collectors who wanted to meet Thomas personally before committing to purchases. The exhibition was growing beyond Naomi's control, taking on a life that demanded the appearance of an artist who existed only in scattered lies and desperate improvisation. They're offering substantial amounts, Julian explained during a planning meeting, his excitement barely contained. But they want authentication beyond my word. They want to meet the artist, understand his process, his inspiration. This is standard for emerging talent at this price point. Naomi felt walls closing in from all directions. Thomas won't do it. He's adamant about privacy. Maybe we should scale back, reconsider the whole exhibition. Scale back? Julian looked at her like she'd suggested burning the paintings. Naomi, this is the opportunity of a lifetime for Thomas. These collectors could establish his entire career. Why would we scale back? Because Thomas doesn't exist, she wanted to scream. Because I'm the artist and I'm terrified that admitting the truth will change everything between us in ways I can't predict or control. Because I'd rather live with this lie than risk losing the way you look at me now, with respect untainted by romantic complication. Let me talk to him again, she said weakly. Maybe I can convince him to at least do video calls with collectors. Julian's expression softened. I don't understand him, this compulsion for isolation. If I had talent like his, I'd want the world to see it, to know it, to celebrate it. Art isn't meant to hide in darkness. Some people create for themselves, not for recognition, Naomi offered, speaking her own truth disguised as someone else's philosophy. That's noble, Julian acknowledged. It's also wasteful. Beauty shared multiplies its impact. Beauty hoarded eventually suffocates under the weight of its own potential. His words landed like physical blows. Was that what she'd been doing? suffocating her own potential under layers of fear and self-protection? The question haunted her as the meeting continued, as Julian outlined timelines and marketing strategies for an exhibition built entirely on fabrication. That night, working late alongside Julian to finalize gallery layouts, Naomi felt the careful distance she'd maintained beginning to crumble. They stood before a wall mock-up, debating placement, and Julian stepped closer to point at a specific section. His shoulder pressed against hers, warm through the thin fabric of her blouse, and neither of them moved away. "Here," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Your strongest piece should anchor this wall. The one with the blues and grays, the emotional landscape. It deserves prominence." "That's actually my favorite too," Naomi admitted, forgetting to maintain the fiction of separation between herself and Thomas's work. "Because Thomas painted it for you?" Julian asked, turning to look at her, his face impossibly close. "Because it speaks to something true," she whispered, unable to look away from gray eyes that seemed to see everything she was trying to hide. Julian's hand rose slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Naomi," he breathed, and the way he said her name felt like a prayer and a question and a plea all compressed into 3 syllables. She should have stepped back. Should have reinforced boundaries. Should have reminded him about Thomas, about propriety, about all the reasons this moment couldn't happen. Instead, she swayed forward slightly, pulled by gravity she couldn't fight, by want she'd suppressed too long, by the terrifying possibility that maybe he could want her too, not despite her lies but beyond them. Julian's other hand came to rest on her waist, and Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Time suspended itself, the gallery fading until only this existed, 2 people balanced on the knife's edge between professional distance and personal catastrophe. "I should go," Naomi forced herself to say, even as her body refused the command to move. "Thomas is expecting my call." The lie shattered the moment like dropped glass. Julian's hands fell away, and he stepped back, expression closing off into something neutral and professionally appropriate. "Of course," he said, voice carefully empty. "Give Thomas my regards. Tell him we need final approval on the exhibition catalog by Friday." Naomi gathered her things with shaking hands and fled into the night, leaving Julian standing alone among shadows and paintings that told truths their supposed creator would never voice. Truth has weight. It presses down on shoulders until spines curve, until breathing becomes labor, until the only relief comes from setting the burden down entirely, regardless of consequences. The exhibition date approached with the inevitability of execution. Invitations had been sent to collectors across continents, press releases distributed to art magazines that mattered, catalogs printed with Thomas Bennett's name emblazoned across covers alongside Naomi's paintings. The lie had grown so large it had its own postal address and media presence. And still, the artist himself remained conspicuously absent, a ghost who haunted his own success. Naomi hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles shadowed her eyes like bruises, and her hands trembled constantly from exhaustion and anxiety that coiled in her chest like barbed wire. She'd stopped painting entirely, unable to create under the crushing weight of accumulated deception. The irony wasn't lost on her, she'd invented Thomas to protect her art, and now the lie was suffocating her creativity completely. Simone had stopped being gentle during their interventions. "This is insane," she'd said over their last lunch, gripping Naomi's hand across the table with enough force to hurt. "You're destroying yourself to maintain a fiction that never made sense. Tell Julian the truth before this whole thing explodes in your face." But Naomi couldn't find the words, couldn't imagine the conversation that began with, "I've been lying to you for months," and ended anywhere except complete disaster. So she continued the charade, creating increasingly elaborate excuses for Thomas's absence, watching Julian's patience fray and his suspicion sharpen. 3 days before the exhibition opening, Julian called Naomi into his office. The formal summons felt ominous, his assistant's expression sympathetic in ways that suggested she knew something Naomi didn't. The walk down the corridor felt like a condemned prisoner's final march. Julian sat behind his desk, hands steepled, expression carved from marble. Before him lay a folder Naomi didn't recognize, closed but somehow threatening in its simple existence. "Sit down, please," he said, voice professionally courteous in ways that felt worse than anger. Naomi sat, perching on the chair's edge, prepared for flight. "I hired a private investigator," Julian began without preamble, tapping the folder with one finger. "Not out of malice, but out of necessity. The collectors were demanding background verification on Thomas Bennett before committing to six-figure purchases. Standard practice for emerging artists with limited public presence." Naomi's blood turned to ice in her veins. The walls seemed to tilt at dangerous angles. "Would you like to know what the investigator found?" Julian continued, his gray eyes locked on hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No Thomas Bennett studying in Florence. No artist by that name in any European program. No social media presence, no exhibition history, no digital footprint whatsoever. It's like your fiancé doesn't exist, Naomi." "Because he doesn't, does he?" The question hung in air thick enough to drown in. Naomi opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. All her carefully constructed excuses dissolved like watercolors in rain. "The paintings are yours," Julian said, not asking, stating. "Every single one. You created them, you brought them here, you've been lying to me for months about their origin." "I can explain," Naomi whispered, but the words sounded pathetic even to her own ears. "Please do," Julian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, "because I'm genuinely curious how you justify building an entire exhibition on a foundation of lies. How you justify letting me invest time, money, reputation on an artist who exists only in your imagination." The anger in his voice finally penetrated her shock, and something inside Naomi cracked open. 3 years of suppressed truth came pouring out in a flood she couldn't control. "I was terrified," she said, tears streaming down her face unchecked. "When you found those paintings, when you looked at them with such appreciation and interest, I panicked. I knew if you discovered I was the artist, everything would change. You'd see me differently, treat me differently. Maybe you'd question whether I was really qualified for my job, whether I'd been wasting your time playing curator when I should have been creating. Or worse, you'd pity me, this wannabe artist filing your paperwork and dreaming impossible dreams. So you invented a fiancé instead?" Julian's voice carried disbelief and hurt in equal measure. "The fiancé part came later," Naomi admitted, wiping at tears that kept falling. "At first, Thomas was just the artist. But then you started asking questions, wanting to meet him, and I realized a mysterious artist would eventually require an appearance. So I made him my fiancé because that created distance, protection, a reason you couldn't get too close to the truth." She took a shuddering breath. "And because you'd asked me to dinner once, at the holiday party, and I'd wanted to say yes so badly it terrified me. So I used Thomas as a shield against my own feelings." The confession settled between them like smoke. Julian's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to track: surprise, understanding, frustration, something that might have been hope. "You were afraid of me?" he asked quietly. "Not of you," Naomi corrected, her voice breaking. "Of what you represented. Of the choice between my career and my heart. Women in this industry, we're always walking impossible tightropes. If I dated my boss and succeeded, people would say I slept my way to every achievement. If I dated my boss and failed, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Either way, my art would always be suspect, tainted by questions about how I really earned my place in this world." Julian stood, moving around the desk to lean against it, closer to her but not touching. "So you believed I'd see your talent and immediately want to exploit it? That I'd reduce years of hard work and genuine skill to sexual politics?" "I didn't know what to believe," Naomi said honestly. "I only knew that admitting the truth felt more dangerous than maintaining the lie. And then the lie grew and grew until I couldn't find my way out anymore. Every conversation, every planning session, every moment you praised Thomas's work, I wanted to scream that it was mine. That I was the one creating paintings that moved you, that made you excited, that you wanted to share with the world. Silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken words. Julian's jaw worked as he processed revelations that rewrote months of shared history. The painting you called my strongest piece, he finally said, the blue and gray landscape. You told me Thomas painted it for you. What's the truth? Naomi closed her eyes, remembering the night she'd created that particular piece. I painted it after the holiday party. After I lied to you about having a boyfriend. I went home and felt so empty, so angry at my own cowardice, that I had to put it somewhere. That painting is loneliness and regret and self-inflicted isolation. It's the portrait of someone who chose safety over truth and hated herself for it.